Hello everyone and welcome back to Football Manager 2018 and the first part of a brand new experiment where we take a look at what would happen if you had the perfect manager in the game. Now this is an experiment that I did last year on the FM Scout channel and I tried to do it a little bit this year when we had the perfect player. He retired, became a manager, but because he didn't have the Continental Pro license, he could not complete the experiment properly because none of the big teams would have him and he was too big a name to go and do the Continental Pro license. So ultimately that experiment failed. This one I think will work as well as it did last year. And the man that we have chosen to take on, he's an established manager. It's this poor chap right here. It's Gary Monk, the absolute legend of a man who just can't seem to catch a break in football. He's not had the best career if we have a look at his career stats, although there's his football stats there. I'm not even sure how we get to his managerial career stats. If we look at his overview, he's had 5 club manager jobs. I think Leeds was the latest failure for him. Maybe his milestones. Does that have his history? There it is. Middlesbrough, Leeds, Swansea. And that's his sort of managerial history, and then some time at Barnsley and various different clubs before that. But he's not had the best time, although he did win the Carabao Cup with Swansea, which I completely forgot about, and League One with Swansea, but I suppose that was as a player rather than as the manager. So he's now stepped down as his role of Middlesbrough, and you might have noticed he is now in charge of FC United of Manchester. Now the reason that I've chosen them is that they're a team that I think Football Manager tends to favour in the lower leagues. They've got a lot of room for potential, a lot of room to expand, and the game seems prime for them to become a club that does develop over time. And there's no point throwing him into a really down in the dumps team because he's just going to struggle in the first 5 to 10 years to turn it around. Whereas with a club like FC United, I think he can hit the ground running and start to get them up the leagues. Not as quickly as a player manager might, but certainly better than an ordinary manager at the club would. So you can see it on the screen there. He's 38 years old, another reason why I picked him, because he's quite young, especially for a manager. He's on a normal kind of contract, currently contracted to 2022. I've also put in an extra clause there, if we have a look at his contract details, so that he will receive an extension after promotion of 3 years. That's just to make it easier going forward so that he won't get sacked, because he's got the will leave at end of contract. That means that the board will never sack him. Even if he gets relegated, he will stay in charge. So that gives us a pretty much 8-year guarantee, so long as they get promoted in the first 5 years, which I imagine they will. I've also upped all of his managerial stats to 20, which is quite helpful. Absolutely everything really has been boosted totally up to the max, and that includes these front end things, but also if we look at his personal details, you can see, oh sorry, that's the wrong one, that's his personal details. If we look at his staff details, you can see he's got 200 current ability and 200 potential ability, maximum reputation as well, ambition down at 1 because we don't want him being tempted by other jobs in club football, but loyalty up at 20 because we want to see what he can do with a non-league team. This isn't about seeing if he can become the manager of Barcelona, because with reputation like that, he just would become the manager of Barcelona as soon as that became available. But everything else set to 20. Temperament and controversy, I've never really figured out which the best way to go on that is. So if somebody knows if 20 is just the best one for both, do let me know in the comments. I've left his preferred formations alone. I've upped some of these things, mostly the ones to do with buying players, mind games, business, resources, patience and versatility, all of which I think will be quite helpful. He's got 20 for manager as well, so his back room stats, his managerial stats, everything there completely boosted to the max. So he is the perfect manager. What we're going to do now is go forward 1 year at a time for 5 years, so you'll get a pretty comprehensive cover in this first experiment. We'll have a look at what he's achieved in that year, and then we will think about doing a second part. I'm not sure if it's going to be worth it or not. It depends what the progress is in the first year, but do drop a like on the video if you want to see another part to this experiment. If it gets enough likes, I'll put another one out. Otherwise, I'll just move on to another experiment for you guys in a couple of days' time. So drop a like on the video if you want to see a second part, or you can wait to the end of the episode and do that. But let's go forward a year now and we'll see where he's got to. Well, we are now 1 year into the future, and as you can see, he is still the manager of FC United. All of his stats are exactly where they were before because we have also frozen his stats. For some reason, the in-game editor does not want to load on this screen. If we go to FC United, we can see this is where they were. We didn't actually really look at the club before going forward in time, but you can see they bounced around in the 7th tier before getting up into the regional leagues in 14-15, and they've established themselves well here, finishing 5th in the 17-18 season. So doing reasonably well last season under Gary Monk. Steve Irwin, currently their captain. I don't know if he was already there before because we didn't look. You can see the stadium here as well. If you look at their facilities, they've got very good stadium condition, basic corporate facilities, poor training facilities, and poor youth facilities. So if somebody wants to keep a note of that as we go forward in the experiment and see if they improve. You can see their reputation not the best, so doing well to get a manager like Gary Monk. And their senior squad, I mean, there's not really a lot to look at there unless you're an FC United fan. And in the transfer history screen for the first season in the game, you can see he brought a lot of players in on loan, a couple of free transfers in there as well. He has got 20 for resources, which usually means that they start to pull in slightly better players. But ultimately, it's going to take a while before we know if those players are doing very well. But the first season in charge got off to a good start. 2-0 win over Brackley. Actually, a brilliant start, this. I mean, this little run here, fantastic stuff. A couple of defeats there didn't help. And then they hit a really rough patch after getting knocked out of the FA Cup and the FA Trophy. But they got through to the first round. The FA Cup's pretty good. Then a really poor run of form, and even worse run of form right at the end of the season. And they did make the playoffs, but in the first round, they did not manage to go through. They lost 2-0 to Spennymoor. If we go and have a look at the league table for that season, then we can see that they did finish in 5th place. They did not manage to get promotion, despite finishing well above AFC Telford, who eventually got there. If we look at the playoffs and the first round, you can see they were knocked out by Spennymoor 2-0. Telford went through as well. And then in the semi-finals, you can see more there. So they would have had to win 3 matches to win the playoffs, which is exactly what Telford went and did. Absolutely sensational for Telford there getting up. But FC United did miss out, 12 points off the automatic promotion spot as well. This is a difficult league to get out of because there are only 2 teams going up out of 22. So it might take a couple of tries for them to get there. They might just miss out on the top spot, which could be quite difficult. But I think when they're out of here, I would expect them to then start progressing up the leagues, hopefully a little bit quicker. But so far, so good, really. I'd say that's a decent finish in the first season. So let's go forward another year and see if they've managed to get much further. 1 more year into the future, and 40-year-old Gary Monk still at FC United. You can see everything is completely unchanged. If we go to the club, you can see they did not manage to get promoted, finishing in 7th place last time. They've lost their vice-captain. If we look at their transfer history for that last season gone, you can see he has been wheeling and dealing like nobody's business, completely overturned the squad. Huge changes, a lot of players coming in to that senior squad, making it a very, very big one. Certainly more value in the team since he's done that, so Asini's attracting slightly better players. If we look at their senior squad schedule and go back to their original season, then you can see what an awful start to the season they had. And I think had he not had an unsackable position, he probably would have been sacked shortly after these run of results, because that's a dreadful start. But it improved so much afterwards. A little bit disappointing around the time of the FA Cup, as it seems to be the case each year. But they did make the playoffs again, and they actually won in the first round 3-0 over Tamworth, before then getting knocked out on penalties in the semi-final of the playoffs. That's really disappointing. Both matches away from home, which is quite unfortunate. But to go out like penalties like that is really disappointing for them, really. But a sign they're getting a little bit closer, progressed 1 more round this season, so hopefully next season they can push on again and actually get out of this division. Gary Monk still at FC United, and if we have a look at the club, you can see they finished in 5th place this time. They're bouncing in and around those playoff positions, but did they manage to get promoted? That's a real question. If we have a look at their senior squad schedule, going back the previous season, They did reasonably well at the start, certainly better start than last season, not doing very well in the FA Cup or FA Trophy. Really poor form through the middle of the season. Good little run then, and they did beat Kidderminster 3-1 in the first round of the playoff, but then against AFC Telford, who they beat in the playoffs last year, they were beaten 2-0, so did not manage to get promoted yet another year. In their transfer history for this season, again, Gary Monk bringing in a lot of free players on loan. Some players going out made a transfer profit that season, but still not quite doing enough to get up. If we have a look at their senior squad, even more value in the team now. You can see he is building that team. And while a normal player manager would get in a lot of quality players day one, get promoted in 1 or 2 seasons, it is going to take longer for the computer managers to do that because they're more limited in the players they can bring in. And spotting those players as well, from what I can tell, is much more difficult. But let's go forward another year. Again, Gary Monk's still there, but fallen down this time to 8th place, the lowest finish they've had with him as a manager in the schedule for this season. You can see still in the Vanarama North there, so didn't get promoted, but they had a nice run here, but these defeats intermittently popping up, and then at the end of the season, a calamitous drop-off in form. Only 3 wins from January onwards. They only won 5 great games in the entire second half of the season from January onwards. Now, if we have a look at the Vanarama North, not even making the playoffs this time about, go to the stages and drop back. Given they only won 5 games towards the end of the year, they weren't that far off. Had they won 3 more games, they'd have had 75 points, finished up in the playoffs. Even a couple more games might have got them there. But had they... Actually, they're only 12 points off. Had they won 4 or 5 more games in the second half of the season, which isn't that many in the grand scheme of things, they would have got promoted, probably in the automatic promotion position. And you can see Boston United there, a team that we've already run an experiment on in this version of the game, already been promoted without the help of a perfect manager. So this is not looking good for Gary Monk. And if he doesn't get promoted in the next year, I'm not sure I'm actually going to carry this experiment on, because he is clearly not doing the job for FC United. Well, we are 5 years into the future at this point in this series. No progress for Gary Monk so far, but if we have a look at this final season, you can see in the Vanarama North, patchy start to the season. They then recover it massively here, even winning in the FA Cup first round against non-league Bromley, getting into the second round against Oldham, but losing in the replay and getting knocked out. But it's still an excellent run of form, and for once around the time of the FA Cup, they haven't completely capitulated in the league. If anything, they're going from strength to strength. And then right at the bottom of the season, if we look all the way down there, no playoffs, but with a winning streak like that, that can only mean one thing for FC United. And if we have a look at their stages for this competition and drop back 1 year, you can see Gary Monk finally wins the league with FC United. It's only taken him 5 years to do it, but they did it by quite a margin, 11 points, which would have got them promoted in any of the previous 5 seasons, I think. Absolutely brilliant. Semi-professional club, I don't remember it saying that before, maybe it did, I might be misremembering that. But if we have a look at their transfer history and the deals he may have done to get them there, you can see not too much business the previous year. Most of it happening years and years before. Not years and years before, but the years before. And you can see in their club value, players at 20k, 18k, 15k, not as many high value players in the squad. Certainly a smaller squad, although he has managed to secure Paul Ince, which is quite impressive, bringing him out of retirement. That's a joke, by the way. People don't need to attack that one. But he seems to have done reasonably well in this final season, winning by quite a way to get himself back into a driving position and hopefully push them further up the leagues, because I think this is arguably one of the most difficult leagues to get out of. And now he's in the Vanarama National League. Actually, this one's not any easier. He's still got to face either winning it or finishing in the playoffs and winning the playoffs if he's going to get out of the league. So they're currently sort of... it is going to be quite tough. I'm hoping it won't take another 5 years for him to get out of this league, but we can only wait and see, really. If you've enjoyed this experiment, though, do drop a like on the video. I think it does have a lot of potential, but we might need to change the format of how we go forward in time. Some people have criticised jumping 5 straight years ahead, so today I thought I'd do it 1 year at a time. If you think that's too slow for an experiment like this, do let me know down in the comments, and next time out I'll probably go 10 years in the future, depending on how long it takes him to get up the leagues. If he does it quite quickly, I'll do 5 years. I'll break it down a year at a time so he can see the progress, but if it takes time, I will just jump 5, 10, 15 years ahead. So let me know down in the comments what you think about that. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to see the next part of this experiment in a couple of days' time. You can also support the channel on the website, gencaldo.com, or you can go on Patreon or Twitter. Links all down in the description for all of that. But until next time, see ya.